the Lit Ladies.
I'm Christie.
I'm Kelly.
And I'm Carissa.
Three writers and moms exploring how to live out our faith in our literary lives.
We span the country from the coast to the Midwest. And with different stages of life, careers, and favorite genres, we're sure to cover the literary landscape.
In every episode, we'll discuss books we love, reading life, and writing craft, using the Bible as our guide for beauty, goodness, and truth. New episodes drop every other Friday.
Hello and welcome back to the Lit Ladies podcast. We are so excited to have you join us today. We have our very own special guest, KyLee Woodley. She is a friend of all of ours at the Lit Ladies. She's our critique group leader of our Scribes 219 group, a mother of three, co-host of the Historical Bookworm podcast, and today we are celebrating the release of her new book, The Bandit's Redemption. So KyLee, welcome. We are so glad. We have chills to be interviewing you in this position because you made it. You are a published author. So thank you for being here today. Go ahead and start with the tagline of your newest book.
Yes, absolutely. I'd love to share, especially since I know each of you have contributed in different ways. And thank you for having me on the show.
We're so excited.
So, The Bandit's Redemption is a story that really just starts with there's a holdup gone wrong, a reluctant outlaw, and the captive she's sworn to guard. So that kind of just sums it up, some fun there. And it's available on Amazon and a bunch of other platforms, paperback and ebook.
Okay, and for our listeners who may not know, it is historical fiction set in what time period?
So it's 1875 in the American West. I wouldn't necessarily coin it like a Western, like it's not on a ranch. I read a lot of Westerns like Mary Connealy and Karen Whittemire, and I wouldn't put it quite there, but it is set in the West, and they travel down through actually Idaho and into Utah, and we look at some places that are a little less popular, but there were some really unique, if you've been in Idaho, you just know that it's beautiful there. And there were some unique things that I got to explore and seeing how they would, once they kidnapped Jesse, the main, the male protagonist, traveling down, trying to get to Salt Lake City where the final battle happens, so to speak. It was a lot of fun. So sort of in the West as far as the West was really interesting at that point in time. I know y'all don't necessarily write historical, but it was because it was settled last, once the railroad came through. So 1875, you had a huge influx of immigrants, and just there was a lot going on there. And but in the midst of that, so they're in the West, and they go through a lot of rural areas. So we also see some really big cities at the time. But I could just go on and on because I'm a historical author and I love to talk about the way things were, but I don't want to take up all the podcast time.
It definitely feels like I haven't read a lot of Westerns, but I definitely got a Louis L'Amour feel with the different locales that they go to.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And kind of, I don't know if it's a secret fact or just a fact that we all know, but KyLee does exceptional research. I don't know that any of us write in her genre, but she always knows so much about the time periods that she's writing, which is an interesting trait to have if you are a historical fiction author. I think that probably goes hand in hand. So in our podcast, Lit Ladies podcast, we typically take a topic and dive into it a little bit further. And today we really want to focus on perseverance in writing and consistency. And nobody personifies that more than KyLee. So KyLee, I want to start with just asking a little bit about what made you want to be a writer, and have you tell us a little bit about your writing journey?
Sure. I think that anyone who makes it, so to speak, which even that term is relative depending on, I think everyone has their own idea of what make it, what that actually means. But if you get to a point where you're I'm published, my work's out there, it's reaching people, and you've set goals and you've attained those goals, I think it's put you would have had to have put in a lot of work. So I like to think that I'm no special case when I go to conferences and listen to other people tell about their journey and their, 20 rejections or 30 rejections or however many it is. We've all been there. So for any of your audience who are aspiring writers, keep going, keep trying, keep writing, studying the craft. I was not a born writer. I have a reading disability, so I shouldn't be. Reading was really tough for me. I was practically illiterate until I was 15, at which point I ended up moving in with my dad, and he put me in a Christian school, and they tested me and, oh, where are we going to put her? So reading and writing, I was at a first grade level, which was, you can imagine being 15 in this day and age. And I'm not that old. I'm not young, but but that was a huge shocker. And so I never dreamed of being an author. I have a very just charming older sister, and she could do everything, and she loved to read books, and she actually would read to me. Part of the reason I have such an intense love for story is because of those stories that she shared with me in some of our favorite books. And I'm like, oh, I read this and I read this, and people are like, I thought you couldn't read, and I was like, oh yeah, my sister read it to me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's cool.
Yeah,
That inspired you. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of tutoring. And by the time that I joined ACFW in 2015, my writing had improved, but I was still really I didn't just write. I never did. I just wrote to get by in school. And then I got my first degree. And so I would write, and I got okay grades, but I never did it for fun. And then I just had this burning story, and it needed to be written, and I couldn't get it out of my head. And so I just sat down at the computer one day and started writing that out. And it was, since the majority of what my sister read was historical, and the majority of the movies we watched as a family were historical, that's just kind of how it started. And I'm fascinated with the way things were, and just getting by with what you have, and being, different skills and ingenuity that you have to get by. And in those days, just the way that they did things, it just fascinates me. So the historical genre in general, I think it appeals to me.
Sure. So you did not dream of being a writer. It wasn't until you had this story idea in your mind and you just wanted to get it out.
Yes. And so I had tried to write, sort of finished about 3 books, and then I entered the First Impressions, which is American Christian Fiction Writers Unpublished writing competition that they have, and I got really low scores, and that crushed me, because I was like, see, I am stupid. Why did I even try this? Just all the voices that we listen to that we shouldn't. But one of the judges was like, you need to read this book on craft, and this book on craft, and this book. And so once I picked myself up after crying a lot, I did, and I was like, oh, so I can fix it. I can actually do something about this. I can make it better. It doesn't just have to stay, the way it is. And discovering craft books was really empowering for me. And then again, I'm consuming information in a way that is not specific to my learning type. I do much better with conferences and video and audio, and I listen to all my books on audio on double speed, and I'm good to go. But sit me down and I have to read. It takes a long time.
It takes longer to read, sure.
So
it's there's something kind of inspiring about failure if you have the right attitude about it. It's you're crushed at first, and then you're like, you know what? I'm just going to show them.
It's so true. And I know we've all had experiences here with this, but the number of people I've talked to that have gotten bad scores on a contest at first, it's a large number. And it's because you don't know what you're doing until you start doing it. And I think this probably happens to all of you guys, but you'll talk to someone and tell them you're a writer, and they'll inevitably be like, oh, I have this book idea.
Yeah.
I want to write a book too.
Oh,
and you're
too.
like, okay, that's so great. But getting it from your head to out and to follow the plot and the structure and the pacing, it's a challenging task. So without knowing and studying, it's really hard to know exactly how to do that. So,
or the worst question when they ask you, "Oh, where can I get your book? Where can I read it?" And you're like,
"Yeah, they just like assume that you're already published."
Yes.
Yeah.
Or they ask you, like, "So what's new with your writing?" And you're like, "Yeah, I know, I've been writing for 10 years. I get it." You would think there would be an update by now, but no, there's not. So,
is there a favorite time period you have to write about?
I think that probably the late 1800s and the early 1900s, because of all the amazing inventions.
Yes.
And the way that, and just travel at that time. People were able to move more quickly. And so that applied to, the way that they were traveling, but also like on a business level. And so I like to research world fairs and to see like the earliest, like they called it a Nickelodeon, which was like a silent film. Like, I'm like, wait, that was like 120 years ago.
Wow.
Like it was so long ago. And they had, it was just, they had like so many different things. And then there's this lady. Oh, I can't remember her name. She's so beautiful. She was in like 1880s maybe. And she was a mathematician and just a brilliant scientist as well. Extremely clever. And she made what I believe is the first calculator. But then when they went back and they looked, like however many years later, at least a good 75. Anyway, they looked at her writing and stuff, and she had the idea for the computer. Like,
oh, wow.
And she was in the 1800s. Like, she was just that advanced. And so I like to look at, like, what they were doing, like, with just different things. Like, the telephone was invented so that Alexander Bell's sister, she was deaf. And so he invented a telephone so that, like, she could have a speaker near her ear, and that inspires hearing aids. And just, there's so many different things that I find fascinating that kind of took place in the late 1800s moving into the early 1900s, and just so.
Well, like we didn't even have time zones because nobody traveled. And then they got the Transcontinental Railroad, and it's like, oh, I guess we need time zones because we're all getting confused about what time. It's a different time everywhere. And
Yeah. And I like to read like old papers. I was reading an old newspaper today from 1875 and looking at like the ads, and they had poetry and then ads for saloons. And then down at the bottom, there's like so-and-so's heal all ails.
Oh my gosh.
Pill. So like, and I was like, oh, that's like snake oil salesman right there. And like they had this list of like everything: sore joints, headaches, migraines, irritable bowel, other things that aren't appropriate to say on a podcast. I was like, seriously, guys, come on, don't put that in the paper.
What was it? Do you know what the pill was? Like, what was in it?
No, it did. They don't often entail the ingredients. No.
So, okay, Christie and I write romantic suspense, and I know generally our process is we'll see something that happens in the news, like a crime story, and we're like, oh, we should write a story about that. So, like, let's say there's an abduction. I'll be like, oh, that's a great idea for a story.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from you, though, is you look at the past and you see some of these different inventions or things that would have gone on. And then you think, what if I put characters in that? What if a story revolved around that type of thing? Is that how it works for you?
Well, and people, too, right? Don't you put sometimes real historical figures into your...
I do. I love researching historical figures. I read a journal that was written. I read a couple of journals. This last book that I read about a little boy, and he lived in San Francisco in the 1890. No, that would have been 1865. And like talking about like going through the city and just the way that he did like moved in the market, and it just fascinates me. But definitely the history inspires me to write. For one thing, if you're a historical author, then what you write is going to be challenged, because people who love historical fiction, they love history, and they're going to be like, actually, that city didn't have electricity. They got it 2 years later. So commenting, like leaving a review,
Wow.
Seriously,
be
like
kind
you
of
have
like
to
that, too.
support yourself. And then different things like social norms, like if you have a woman who's supposed to be in mourning for 1 year, or if it was pre-Civil War, she would have to be in mourning for 2 years. Men only had to be in mourning for 3 months with an armband, but we don't go into that.
And then there's like half mourning, so you can only wear certain
You can
colors.
wear purple and gray.
Oh my
But
goodness.
so if you want to change that, sometimes people get really irritated over that. And so I was actually doing genealogy research, and my great great grandmother was in Nebraska in 1880, and it showed that she had one daughter and her husband died. And bless her heart, and I say that in kindness, she waited a whole year, like almost to the date, to marry. And then I was looking at this research, and I'm like, wait, she's here on this death certificate. And it was like 1 month later, and that husband had died. And she married my great-great-grandpa like a week later. Like,
wow.
She did her year and then she remarried real fast.
Yeah. She just like that. She did a year waiting for that husband. She had one daughter. Oh my goodness, that poor woman in Nebraska. Can you imagine?
No. Okay,
the
so
1880s.
then the romance lover in me wonders, did she remarry for love or was it
have no
convenient?
Yeah, that was like
I don't-
really
Okay,
quick.
now
I don't
the
have
murder
one.
writer
She
in
knew.
me is like, how did he die? I mean, that's two.
Oh, I
Like,
thought
come
about
on.
that too. I was like, what if they like
That's the way
plotted
I
that?
see it.
Yeah, see, there you have all those different angles. But to like justify, like sometimes people did step out of the social norms, especially in the West when you're in desperate situations.
Sure. Yeah,
Well,
you
that
didn't- you
creates a
didn't
lot
have
of
some
interesting
protocols.
conflict too. I think that's the part that always bugs me about historical books that don't really take into account, like, okay, that would have been improper for that man and woman to be alone together. Like, it makes you be creative as an author too. I'm writing a historical right now, and it's been a really interesting challenge for that reason. How would they actually act? What would they actually say? They wouldn't say it that way. How would they think? You know?
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason too. The firsthand, like, what's the word, Christie? So like reading something firsthand as far as challenging social norms, to read something and be like, actually, so-and-so did that, or actually looking at the, like the fad that people, okay, I'm just going to say this.
Like a primary source.
The fact that people didn't have like premarital sex, that's not actually true. Like in New England in the 1870s, they had this huge number. Like when you look at the data of pregnancies, because, well, I don't know why. Well, we do, but like that, and then like your Puritanism and just the different things, people did counter that, because they didn't want mothers without babies and all the things, babies without mothers, all those things. But like there are things that we believe because we've been told that by like the past 2 or 3 generations. But like if you dig far enough historically, there are some exceptions to the rules and the way we see things, especially in looking at different parts of different parts of the nation. I could just go on and on. Like, are you down by Texas, by Mexico, or up by Canada? And some of the traditions that you have there and things that are considered acceptable are very different. And same with East and West. So I love writing historical. I just think it's fascinating.
Oh, you're so well suited to it. And there's this concept that we studied in communication called positive history rewriting. And it's where you look back on something that happened in your life and it's like, well, that wasn't so bad. And you rewrite it in your mind to be more positive. I swear generations do that, right? Every generation thinks their generation is the best. And the next generation is ruining all the progress. So I'm sure that happens historically. People look back and think they didn't do those things back then. But the reality is they're probably just telling themselves stories.
I feel like I've heard you say one time, KyLee, like, kind of that same thing. Like there's actually a lot that we can learn from people in the past and the way they thought and did things, and maybe even just like, I think about, we're just so consumeristic. I think we mentioned that on a previous podcast, like thinking about how many books can I read, and it's all about the number and how productive am I, and like we're not machines, but we're like trained to think that way, because that's the way our world is. Whereas like people in the past, they slowed down and they had time to just like well, what they had to work a lot, so maybe less time than we do in a way. But, like maybe they thought about life differently, and there's actually something we can learn from that. I don't know. I've heard you talk about that.
Yeah. I like to think that we can learn a lot from the past, especially since you can't look into the future, obviously, but you can look into the past. And sometimes we get stuck in our current, just the presuppositions that we have, depending on the society that you've grown up on. And if you look in the past and not necessarily skim history books, I wouldn't do that because someone put that history book together. But I mean, like, read firsthand events, read historical documents. Have you read all of, I'm just going to say the Constitution, but that's just one example. Different things. I read like the banns for my great grandparents' wedding the other day, and I was like, oh my goodness. And it was just fascinating, but they had to wait. They had to like read the banns and wait, and just the way that society worked then. So I think if we live in the present and we always try to learn from the present. We can't learn from the future because we don't know what's going to happen, but like look at history. And I think that can really help us. I know I feel a sense of, I don't worry as much about the future when I look at history, even if it's like the history of the Romans and different civilizations that I had to like research in my education degree. I noticed there were like patterns and stages that children would like leave their mother and start this and then start something else. And so I always tell my kids, like my son's 16 now, and so I'll tell him, I was like, and he's like, why he gets mad really easily. And I'm like, it's because you're in your soldier phase. And he's like, what? And I'm like, yeah, daddy's in the general phase. You're in the soldier phase. Like, you've just got a lot of energy, a lot of testosterone. You need to be working out and, you'll grow more thoughtful and plot things out like daddy does now. And that's a little off topic, but that's kind of one example of how I apply that. And then when I go to my preschoolers and just see where they're at, understanding that they're developing where they are developmentally, skills that they need to build, that really just helps me be compassionate as an educator, as opposed to, oh, you're screaming and hitting someone and that's sinful, so you're bad. Like that's not how we need to be. Like, we need to meet people where they are, and understanding people and societies and cultures and the way that they kind of grow, and seeing patterns in history really helps me do that.
I love that. Love that. This is a little off topic, but sure. My parents have a family Bible that is like, I don't even know, a couple hundred years old. And somebody has stuck different papers in there so you can find like newspaper articles but there's this one poem that a mother wrote about her child who had died at like 6 months old or 9 months old, like an infant died. And she wrote this poem about how much she missed her baby. And that always sticks with me, that no matter what generation we live in, how far apart we are, like that mother's love is universal and that pain is universal. And she was how many hundreds of years older than I was.
Wow.
So it's really fascinating to have
beautiful.
just regular people. Yeah, it's really interesting. So, but that Bible goes to my brother because he kept the last name. So, if my family is listening to this. Okay. KyLee, I feel like what you just said about history and culture is just one of the most poignant things I've heard, and that is beautiful. And I hope that our listeners can take that and maybe wrestle with that thought a bit, or pause before getting so caught up in our crazy busy life, and maybe see the benefit of history. So thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about your debut series. So you gave us the tagline of your book, but what is the whole series kind of about?
Well, I actually just put together a description for this series because book 2 is available. I didn't know it was going to be available, and then it just popped up on Amazon.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so
what is the name? Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
I was going to ask what the name of the series is.
Here it is. The Outlaw Heart series takes readers into the Wild West during the Gilded Age, blending sweet romance with a pinch of adventure. Each novel features a main character with a criminal past, all connected to the steadfast Alexander family from the debutante's Revenge, a short story, available when you sign up for the author's newsletter. Whether amidst rugged landscapes or big city life, love blooms and adventure awaits, offering a heartwarming blend of romance and excitement.
Beautiful. I love it. So the Alexander family in the late 1800s, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So is this a historical family, or is it made up or based on any real people?
The family is completely fictional. I have some side characters who are historical. John Muir shows up in book 2, just very briefly, just because, like, anytime I research an area, I'm like, okay, so who was there? Who might they have run into? If you're interested in this, you know, who's going to be there? Like, what was his name? Carlton Watkins was a famous and phenomenal photographer in San Francisco during book 2. And so I started researching him, and his photos were actually passed around Congress when Lincoln was president, and they implemented the Yosemite Valley land grant. So it was like really the birth of our national parks. He was involved in that, but he died in destitution, which is really sad. And so he pops up there too. So the exact Alexander family is not historical. They're you know, my creation, and then I used the historical individuals that I found in research that I thought would be a good fit. No villains are historical because that just gets messy with copyright and everything, and but yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but your main character is interested in photography, right? Doesn't he have? What would the camera have been? What was it called?
So in book 1, it does start with like Jesse Alexander. He is the hero in book 1, and he's bought a camera for his little sister. And she just came out of a bad relationship, and she's like basically just really drawn into herself, and she just like won't come back to life. And that's something they shared before their mother died, was a love for photography. And so he doesn't, his camera is like stolen in the beginning, and then it shows up in book 2. But they would have used some, what was it called? I think it was called dry plate. And the process itself is just ridiculous. I studied it and watched videos on it and tried to understand it, and still don't. But they used gelatin. I thought that was really interesting, and silver on the plates themselves.
I've actually done that.
Have you?
Random. Because I took a traditional darkroom class. I was a photography minor.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I could have, like,
it's very finicky. It's really hard to replicate.
Yeah.
It was a while ago now, but yeah. That sounds familiar. Silver. Yeah.
It's just now realizing you were a photography minor, and it is like all coming together because Chris is so good at visuals and colors. Okay, it makes so much more sense.
Why did we not know that sooner?
I did study it a little bit, yeah.
I'm also like always amazed. It was with you, KyLee. You were asking about images, and she's like, it should be more this, more this, more this. I'm like, I don't even know what she's talking about.
I honestly don't even know how I know that, but hopefully.
You're a photography minor.
I don't know. That's really cool, though. That goes back to the inventions. Like, it's just fascinating to me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have
how
to be
it was
really
used.
And they're huge. I mean, this camera was humongous, right? Like a huge tripod, and it's like you see in the movies, right? You have to have a cloth over you. I think that's what he's doing at the beginning of the book, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. Yes, very detailed. Christie, I know you had a burning question to ask KyLee, so you're up.
I was going to ask you, I mean, I kind of know this, but for our listeners, taking us through the process of like writing and editing and promoting this book, like timelines and how much editing was involved and how much promotion. Now I've gotten the email, so like I said, I know some of this, but for people just to know how much work goes into the production of a book, please tell us.
So there is definitely a lot that goes into writing a book. The first book I had like a year to write, and that was great. The second book I had like 3 months. And so I had an idea, and I'd written the back cover copy, and I learned that the back cover copy is basically like your goal, motivation, and conflict. And it kind of just gets you to the inciting incident. Like, it's not supposed to tell the whole story. And so when I understood that, and understood that if I just get those set really well, that the story can grow, and I can create that because I was afraid that if I wrote the back cover copy, which was required for my contract, that I would be locked into something and have the story take me somewhere else and end up writing something that I was not contracted to write. And so making sure that in the beginning that I'm really get the goal, motivation, and conflict and the stakes there, and that they're good, they're things that you can really connect with, whether it's loss on the emotional journey, interesting as far as like the setting. Book 3 is in Virginia City. I love Virginia City. If you're from Nevada, you probably, or know anything about mining, you've probably heard of Virginia City, Nevada. And so that's something that's interesting that I can throw in there. And then elements like, a female outlaw, a convict who's, from France, but also a miner and on the run, and he meets basically a debutante aspiring to be a female reporter in 1875 in a mining town in the mountains. So tropes that are familiar, but things that set the book apart that are interesting, and having those stakes. Like they have to be good, or you can't build your story. Like you lose your reader's interest, and you'll end up with a story that is just flounders. And so that's really the start. And then I just start researching. I always do a little research in the beginning anyway, because that's really how like my story spark starts, is like a photo or an article. I do love to look at like paintings and old historical photos. And so as far as I've heard that I'm a discovery writer, you ladies probably know better than I do at this point, because we've been doing this for almost 10 years. But I usually start with a couple scenes, and then that kind of like dwindles out, and I have to look at like, what is it? They have the Emotion Thesaurus, but that is a whole series where you have the Emotional Wound Thesaurus, you have the Rule Setting Thesaurus there.
I've got a couple of those.
And so that's really good, because it goes through and details, if this is your wound, this is what the character is going to be, what weakness they're going to have. This is what's going to aggravate it. This what might possibly heal it.
And so that thesaurus.
I'll link these. I was just thinking, I'm writing a note so that we can link these books.
Yeah, they're
Especially
an amazing
for aspiring
tool.
authors out there.
Yes, and I think if you want to get, that good foundation for your stories, that really helps. You can brainstorm too, like with your husband or your friends or whoever. But even if you don't like do exactly, like if you don't choose one out of the source, it just really helps to understand. And I think one of the ladies who co-authored it has like she's like in counseling or psychology or something like that. Like it's a legit. And so I found that I write in stages. I'll try to hurry it up. I feel like I'm rambling. I found that I write in stages, and so the story will kind of run, and I'll be able to write, and it'll just flow, and then I'll kind of slow down. And I found that when I look at historical events in that time and just like dig deeper into like the way things were, like if there's a massive fire, and then in the aftermath of that fire is where my story is, like, and the hero has an interest in like the fire department, and that's actually like his secret hope is to be a part of that and to help people, trying to run down like where everything was, like what fire departments were still there, and going to the site and actually seeing those things, and that really can help inspire stories. And readers of historical fiction are really counting on when your character steps into a room, like they want to step into a room. So knowing what the flooring would be, what the lighting would be, what would it smell like, if
what kind of shoes are they wearing? I had to look that up.
If they're, wood heels sound very different than leather soles on a wooden floor. Right. And so that really helps to like kind of keep me going. I usually have to push through to the end, and I often rewrite the end, or I will write a couple different endings. I found that time is extremely important to layering the story itself, and understanding the characters and getting to know them, which is harder to do if you're rushed. So I believe I wrote book 2 in a couple months, turned it into my editor, and they sent it back for developmental edits. And I worked on that for probably a couple more months and made all the corrections and cleared some things up. And then they'll do one more edit. So, and then I'll get the galley, which is like a printed version of the book, but there are going to be some typos in it, and some like inconsistencies and stuff. Like they haven't line edited it, but like they're like, so here it is, and we can get it into reviewers' hands, and they're still working on it. And then eventually that's done and it goes up on Amazon. One of my favorite parts is filling out the cover questionnaire that I get from Wild Heart Books, because I can write about like what tropes the books use, pictures that I get to add pictures that have been inspired the story, what I think the character looks like, and if there's any like special historical things, elements, or themes that need to be added, like a gold watch or something significant, like maybe someone has a brooch or something that goes through the book. Mine doesn't, but I've seen other people do that. Cool. So yeah, and then finishing that up, and then now I'm working. So book 1's ready to go, and I'm working on the launch. I turned in edits for book 2, and I'm waiting to get the galleys for that. That'll be sent to my house, and I'll look through that. And I'm writing book 3, and I'm going to turn in that first draft here pretty soon. And I just filled out the questionnaire for that. So, yeah, I don't know. It's just been all... I don't...
Whirlwind, kind of.
It has been. So, like as far as steps, I don't know.
That brings me to a question. You kind of touched on it, like at what point do you do your research? It kind of seems like you start, and I think you probably have a lot of like knowledge already, and then you kind of do more research, and that actually inspires you. Because I've heard a couple things like you can't just stop and then I have to research that thing, because I found that I just get lost down the rabbit hole, and now I've spent 45 minutes looking at shoe material or what did women wear as undergarments.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, oh, I didn't write, but also like, I've had another author say, oh, I just don't research till the end. I'm like, how? Because you are inspired by what happens. I mean, maybe that changes the course of your story, introduces a conflict, right?
Yes, absolutely. And then to really have scenes come to life. When I was in Virginia City, like we went down into a mine, and so just being in the earth and feeling that and seeing how dark it is, that was really inspiring. But then going in and reading firsthand accounts, and then learning about some of the superstition that the miners had, and how many like rats there were, and just
I remember that part. I read that chapter.
I have a book with mines, and I went into a mine last year, and I had the same experience. Yes, it was like deep down, like eerie. So
yeah.
I also just want to say, so I think each of us read the book Bandit's Redemption.
I think so.
At some stage of like beginning stages. So like I remember having it on my iPad, and we were on a car drive, and I was critiquing it or something for you. Mm-hmm. When you started showing us the pictures of the cover, it was this crazy moment for me, realizing like that's an actual book. It was so neat. You mentioned that you like filling out the Wild Heart questionnaire. It was really cool, even as a reader, to see it come together with a cover, and it looks so beautiful, and it's just so cohesive. So that was a really fun moment to see. So
thank you. I really do love the cover. It's beautiful. I didn't really have anything that I expected. I've heard from other authors good things and bad things about covers. So I was like, I'm not going to be one of those authors who's like, you have to change this font and you have to. I'm like, that would just be trash. That would not be classy anyway, at least for not for me. But yeah, Wild Heart, they did a great job. I think they contracted someone to make the cover. And I think it's simple and bright and beautiful and still Old West. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Christy, can you pick it up and just put it on the screen just so we can see it?
Oh, yeah.
It'll probably be backwards,
Christy.
yeah.
No, it's fine.
no,
It looks good.
I love
Yeah.
the font. It just makes it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
They do.
I like her blue shirt. I think it's pretty.
Me too.
And since we're talking about the book, The Bandit's Redemption, I do have to say I enjoy how you kind of turn around the trope of like the captive and the kidnappee and the kidnapper, right? Like she's the outlaw and he's kidnapped. This happens at the very beginning of the book. And so it just kind of reverses that, I don't know, the damsel in distress, like, you know, but she falls in love with her kidnapper sort of thing. It's the opposite. So it was so fresh. An interesting dynamic.
Oh, good. No, I'm glad you enjoy that. And I'm very, like, I don't have an agenda or anything. I'd say I'm pretty laid back as a person, and pretty conservative. But I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I didn't have brothers. My dad was a logger. Like, we got things done. You know, there was no stopping. Like, you just didn't stop because you were a girl.
Yeah.
And so I think
there were so many tough women to be a woman in the Wild West.
Oh my goodness.
Especially that far west.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Oh,
Tough
yeah,
as nails,
for sure.
those women. I couldn't do it.
Sure. So I think Jesse and Lorraine really balance each other well. And I hope that people who read it really, really enjoy it and see that. And, it's something to be admired.
So what tips would you give a new writer or someone who wants to be a writer?
I would never tell someone, yes, you should do this. Yes, you should pursue writing, because it is such a huge undertaking. I would say pray. Like really, really pray. And remember that accomplishments are measured, they're really kind of measured within ourselves. So what do you value? I remember getting to a point with y'all in our group being like, okay, Lord, so if I'm never published and the only people who read my stories are my critique group, I can be okay with that. And that was a really hard place to get to. But I had to understand that when writing, I love writing. It makes my life better. If I could write for the rest of my life and no one ever saw my work, would I still do it? Yes, I would. I definitely would. I might do it differently, of course. But I would say pray about it, consult the people around you, educate yourself, look at the market. Because even when you're a fantastic writer or storyteller, there are certain niches and there are things in the market, whether it's you need to study if you're going into the Christian book market or the general market, know what they expect and try and understand the trends. If they say, oh, we don't use set anymore, we don't use, we use action beats, are you willing to be like, oh, I can do that? Are you willing to change the way you write to be more in deep point of view and leave off the the narrator voice, and kind of changing the way that you write? Are you willing to do that? We have to be flexible and, really wise in the way we spend our time and our talent. And but I would never also tell someone don't write. I would never say don't pursue publishing. Whenever someone comes to me and they're like, I'm seriously considering this, I'm like, these are the resources that have helped me. This is what I've learned. Can I look over a chapter for you? Because if someone's going to go down that road, they shouldn't have to go down it alone.
And we all have benefited from other people helping us. And
Yes.
That's actually, we've talked about this before on the podcast, but that's one of the unique things about especially Christian fiction world. People are so willing to help, and people so much further along than we are willing to pull us along as, quote, newer writers.
I found that everywhere, though. I think writers tend to stick together.
You think so?
Yeah.
Maybe.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
I do too.
At least the ones I've met.
That's because you're so nice, Carissa, though. You're like, hi, guys. And they're like, oh, she's good. Come on over here.
She's nice.
She's not a threat.
I think that's great advice, though, KyLee, and especially praying about it, because it's not an easy path to whatever we call success. It's a long process. And we do have to ask a little bit about your family time, but since we're right here, I just want to ask about rejection. Did you get a lot of rejection? What did that look like for you?
Yes, definitely, definitely. And I kept hearing, oh, your writing's really good. I just don't need, I already have an author that I'm representing. They're similar, their work's similar to you, but this is really good. You should go talk to so-and-so, like again and again and again. And it's a long story, but actually how I signed my literary agent is that I pitched to Books and Such and got rejected by Cynthia Ruchti, which if you've met her, she is just a beautiful, gracious person. She emailed me, was so kind, so helpful. And that was my first rejection. And so I was like, oh man, bummer, And so I looked over what she said that I needed to change, and I got on Amazon and back then and looked up a craft book that would help in this particular area so I could strengthen that. And I wrote 2 more books. And then there was an author that I knew locally in Oregon, and her agent was with Books and Such. So she read my book, and then she offered to give me a referral, well, let me introduce you to my agent. I was like, oh, this is so great. Well, and that was in 2019, and that agent's kind of similar thing, it's really good. You're doing really great. I'm already, my plate's full, so I'm just going to pass. And these are the things you need to work on. I don't think you're quite there. She was the one who said, I don't think you're quite there, which I was like, oh, I thought I was. And so then another 2 or 3 years after that, I ran into the author, and she was like, oh, how's it going? I was like, oh yeah. So no, it didn't work out. I'm working on this. And I was pitching at a conference, and she was pitching at a conference. And I got to thinking about, it was Rachel Kent with Books and Such, and just so sweet. And I was like, I wrote the new book, and I wrote it taking the advice she gave me. I wonder if she'd look at it again. And so I dug up that old email and prayed, and I sent her out, and I replied to our last email, and I was like, so this is what I've done, and I've written 2 new books, and here's one of them. And I copied and pasted just the pitch. If you're interested, let me know. Also, I hope I'm not overstepping. She was super sweet, and said, oh yeah, send me your proposal. So I was like, oh, this is it. And then I don't know, something happened. Maybe, she's like a superhero mom. She's homeschooling her children, and she's a literary agent and going to conferences and stuff. And so that didn't work out. And I was, and again, she's just really gracious, and I was really disappointed. And then, so that was probably the beginning of 2023. And then towards the end of 2024, maybe middle, Rachel emailed me, and she's like, we just signed on a new agent, and she represents historical, and I think she would be a great fit for you. And that was Jen Babacan. And sure enough, she read my stuff, and I signed with her. And so, but it was definitely a process. So and there were a lot of other rejections in there. There was one point where a published author referred me to her agent, and at the same time she referred a mutual friend that we had. And so it was kind of a race to the finish, and it was Christmas time. I didn't get my proposal in there. And so she signed, and I got the letter of, it's really great. I'm already representing someone who's similar. So yeah, rejection is part of it. And I would say try and learn from that rejection, and not let it beat you down. It usually takes me a little while to recover from rejection. And don't get jaded. Don't try and, I would never go up to those agents and be like, by the way, I'm published now. That would just, don't, if you even think that, just don't. They're just doing their job. I was at a conference, and I heard a lady ask, so do you ever run into someone who's a big name now that you rejected? And she was like, oh. And the person was like, and did you feel like, man, I wish I'd done that? And she was like, we have a lot of clients that we represent, and it's just a large, business. There are a lot of us. And if someone else, if you're better suited for someone else, I mean, maybe part of the reason you were able to be so successful is because you signed with someone, not me.
Yeah, it has to be the right person.
So true.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah.
And I think one thing in your story that really stands out is the amount of time. You mentioned it was 2019 when you got one rejection, and then you a couple years later submitted one, and then a couple years later, and all that time you were still writing. You wrote more books,
that's what I was
more
going to
books.
say.
So that to me just shows to us the perseverance, the consistency, the learning, the not getting knocked down. And it goes to show, if someone isn't ready to roll up their sleeves and go through that process, they need to think long and hard and pray about it, because most of the time I think that's what it is. I think you get your one-off, someone who's writes a book and publishes it, but a lot of times it's showing up day after day and putting the next step forward. So I think really appreciate you sharing that and the timeline of it. And as we always say, it's you pray for the right home with the right person at the right time, and all those things have to come together.
And it only takes one yes.
It's true.
Yep.
Only takes one yes. Yep.
So you're you have a lot going on, KyLee, and you mentioned you have children, and I know you teach. So the $1 million question that I'm begging to hear the answer to is, how do you juggle family and writing time?
Well, I mean, I juggle it carefully, and I try to make sure that if it's a weekend and I have to write and I'm unable to spend time with my children, that they are doing something special, that they're not just in their rooms, even though I would love for them to be in there reading books, that they're, visiting with one of their amazing aunts, and especially my boy too, but like someone who's like really pouring into their lives, who I trust and admire. And then I would say too, I try and get enough sleep and make sure that work stays at work and use my time effectively. And when I feel my body getting tired, I take time to rest, because right now I'm pretty scratchy. So I mean, you get colds, and there are times when you don't feel well, and then also more recently, I've realized that because of this particular contract, I'm having to create a lot of content, and I got to a point where like my creative well was like kind of dry, and I was like, I just that sentence is the same as that sentence, is the same as that sentence. So reading other authors, reading other creative works, and seeing the way that they do that, and also just allowing myself to be drawn into their story world has also helps to fill my creative well. And I've told my husband and one of our other writing partners, like, for accountability, remind me in the future to not be so aggressive in like the contracts that I sign, so that, I mean, I think one book a year would be good.
Is plenty.
Yes. And because I'm pretty busy right now, and it's a challenge. Like, I wanted to paint my kitchen, and I have not painted my kitchen because I'm writing a book instead. And so that's a sacrifice I can make, though. I can't always make a sacrifice if my daughter's boyfriend breaks up with her and she's having a meltdown in the bathroom. I mean, that's where I'm going to be, because
I love
my
that
kids
you
will
mentioned
grow up.
that. Yeah, I'm reading a book right now, kind of about how, especially like as women or caregivers, our lives tend to be a lot more like they happen in seasons. Our bodies are in a 28 to 30 day like hormone cycle, and for men, it's on a single day. So all the advice that you typically get for productivity and like getting your stuff done, it's like really mostly for men. And women, like, stuff happens, it just comes up. You have to listen to your body, and you can't expect yourself to be the same amount of productive every day.
That's true.
Actually, it's just been like changing my life the past 2 days. I love that you said that, like, listen to yourself. Like, you're not going to be a good mom or a good writer if you're not taking care of yourself either.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think it helps that I'm a teacher, so I have the summer off and different vacations where I can really get some words down without, because at the end of a 9-hour day or whatever it is, I'm pretty drained.
Well,
You
that's
have to
what
know
I
what
asked,
works
like,
for
when
you
in the
yourself.
day is your best writing time?
So I don't typically write every day because when I write, I need like hours and hours to write.
Yeah.
And I might, so then I use my rides to work to listen to stories for that other talented authors have written, to fill that creative well and to like decompress and de-stress. Sometimes I just need like quiet after.
Yeah.
And so I'll write on Saturdays, on the weekends, and I can do some line editing during my break. And then sometimes I will listen to what I've already written on like a read aloud app that I have on my phone and make notes like foreshadow this or, something similar happened here. Or so kind of editing and having that spaced out where I'm drafting on Saturday and then my 1 hour break during work, I'm looking over like and having that read aloud to me. And I try not to like work on typos if I'm going to be focused on like the inner journey and plot points and sort of the big picture stuff, because they say that you use different parts of your brain to do that. And so kind of trying to like divvy those things up into...
Well, yeah, have a plan. So you have a plan for your time block so that you're using it productively.
Yes, because I want to... I mean, we don't have like all the time in the world, and so I really want to use that time wisely.
Smart, so smart. Christie, did you have any other questions to add?
No, because I was going to talk about rejection because Chris and I have been getting plenty of that lately. So, but we're putting ourselves out there more, so I feel like that's a win in of itself, right?
Well, do you know what's funny? I don't know if you want this all the way on the podcast, so you can cut it out later if you want. Yeah. But you literally told me sometime in the last couple weeks what KyLee said. You were like, I've decided, even if all that comes of my writing is that I met the friends in our critique group and got to know these people, it's worthwhile. You said that word for word. So I actually
still believe that. And when she said that, I thought about that. And I was thinking too, like, honestly, I could be a reader for my entire life also. Because there's so much out there to read that is so good.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
So unless I can write something that's quality, like I don't want it out there. So I'm okay reading. I'm okay supporting everyone. I'll just make you read my stuff in the private group.
Well, I don't believe that's going to be the case. I am fully confident things are moving forward for you. I just found it fascinating that KyLee literally echoed what you had said the other day. And maybe that's just the point you have to get to.
Yeah. Didn't Pepper say that too?
Pepper said the same thing. Like it really depends on the right person, the right book. Like everything has to kind of line up. Like you can't force it, you can't push it, and like you have to discover writing for God and writing, for self. It was not about getting published. Yeah,
if you don't love it, you're not going to keep doing it.
That's literally what I put on my Instagram today. That video was that snippet of her saying that.
Oh, I love it. I know. I always joke. I'm like, well, I don't write to make thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, and I'm not writing for quick success. So I write because I can't not write. I feel like it's like this call that I have, but I think there are probably a lot of jobs where you would make a whole lot of money a whole lot faster than
not
on the writing job. Now it might be a hidden blessing one day, but at this point, it's definitely a calling.
Well, we are so excited that you could join us today, KyLee, and we're super excited about your book, The Bandit's Redemption. And what is the actual pub date on that? I don't think as of this point, is it out yet?
It's not out yet. It may be out by the time the episode airs. So it'll be releasing on February the 18th. And it's on Apple Books, Amazon, and then a couple other like Kobo and a couple other sites that are a little bit smaller, but Barnes and Noble and so I'm really excited.
It was great. I just like ate it up. I read it in probably like 2 days.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's just so thrilling. And so you guys are in for a treat. Well, we're so glad you could join us, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us on our literary journey. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Lit Ladies Pod, and rate and review on your podcast platform. That's super important for letting other people know about the podcast. If you enjoy it, share it with a friend. And we'll end with a quote today about perseverance from Walter Elliott. Perseverance is not a long race. It is many short races, one after the other.